Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're taking a look at self-directed learning.
It's definitely a hot topic right now.
Yeah, and for good reason. It feels like this is at the core of how we learn to adapt and grow in a world that seems to be changing faster and faster.
And there's just so much to learn.
I know, right? Luckily for this deep dive, we've got a really great mix of sources to work with. We've got academic papers, articles written from all different kinds of perspectives, even a practical guide from YouTube.
Sounds like we're well equipped.
I think so. But this is more than just defining what self-directed learning is.
Of course.
It's about understanding how it works out in the real world, how it affects you, me, everyone.
Right, like how self-directed learning can impact things like your personal growth, current
Mhm.
trends in education, just understanding how people learn best.
Exactly. But before we go too far, we should probably define self-directed learning, lay down some groundwork.
Yeah, it is a term that gets thrown around a lot these days.
So let's make sure we're all on the same page.
I think this table in PI is 00000029459230164992.pdf really highlights the key points. What people often miss is how different self-directed learning is from things like self-paced learning and self-regulation.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. They all have that idea of the learner being more in control, but they're definitely not the same thing.
For sure. With self-directed learning, the learner is basically in the driver's seat the entire time.
So it's more than just setting your own schedule or picking what you study.
Way more.
It's also about taking responsibility for the whole process, deciding what you need to learn, how you're going to learn it, even checking how well you've actually learned it.
It really is about owning your learning journey.
And when you own it, that's when you start to see some major benefits.
Totally. There are so many benefits. For example, this article, What is Self-Directed Learning? Here are the benefits, talks about the Prenda microschool model.
Oh yeah, I've heard about those.
They're all about creating a learning environment that's really personalized, where the students get to have a voice in what and how they learn.
Those schools are getting some amazing results too. Increased engagement from students, they're developing a real love of learning, they're making great progress in areas they're passionate about.
Makes you wonder if the traditional one-size-fits-all model of education is really tapping into what motivates people to learn.
Maybe not. When you're genuinely interested in something, learning becomes its own reward.
Intrinsic motivation. Powerful stuff.
Like that quote, "Tell me and I forget. Teach me and I may remember. Involve me and I learn." Self-directed learning is all about that involvement.
It's being an active participant in constructing your own knowledge, not just passively absorbing information.
And all that active involvement is where you really start to see those crucial 21st century skills come into play. Critical thinking, problem solving, resourcefulness, adaptability.
You know, those are skills that employers are really looking for.
It's like you're becoming this agile learner who can navigate all the complexities of a world where information is constantly being updated and changed.
Skills that are valuable way beyond the classroom or the workplace.
It's about being able to navigate life itself.
Exactly. Self-directed learning is more than just about getting a good job or doing well in school. It's about developing as a person. It's about empowering yourself. It's about finding that love of learning that can really enrich your life.
So we've talked about a lot of potential benefits of self-directed learning.
A lot of good stuff.
But let's be realistic. No one approach to learning is perfect, right?
Oh, for sure.
So what kind of roadblocks might people hit when they try self-directed learning?
Well, a lot of our sources, especially self-directed learning, 5 problems we cannot ignore, dig in some of those potential problems. And one of the biggest is self-discipline and time management.
That makes sense. If you're used to a traditional learning environment, you've got all these external structures in place, you've got deadlines, assignments, set schedules.
All there to keep you on track.
But with self-directed learning, all of that responsibility shifts to the learner.
And that can be tough if you're not naturally organized or if you don't have a lot of self-motivation. It'd be really easy to lose focus.
And to make it even harder, we're living in this age of information overload. There's so much information out there, it can be super overwhelming.
It can make it really hard to stay focused and make any real progress towards your learning goals.
Which is ironic because we have access to more information than ever before.
It's a double-edged sword.
Absolutely. And that means it's even more important for people to be careful about what information they're taking in and how they're managing their time. It's almost like we need to become masters of our own information diets.
Couldn't agree more. And that actually ties into another point that self-directed learning, 5 problems we cannot ignore, brings up. It's the risk of learners only focusing on the things they're personally interested in, neglecting those essential areas of knowledge that might not be as exciting.
So it's like you're only eating your favorite foods all the time.
Exactly. You might enjoy it at first, but long term, that's not very healthy.
Not a balanced approach.
And that's where self-awareness comes in. Being able to step outside of your comfort zone is so important.
This paper, Challenge Identifying and Stimulating Self-Directed Learning in Publicly Funded Programs.pdf, talks about that.
It emphasizes the difference between a self-directed learner, a self-expressive learner, and a self-absorbed learner.
Being able to make that distinction, I think that really gets to the heart of what true self-directed learning is.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay, well,
Someone might think they're being self-directed, but they're just chasing after whatever whim they have and calling it learning.
it's like the difference between just dabbling in a hobby versus really pursuing knowledge in a disciplined way.
And that difference doesn't just impact the learner themselves, it impacts the institutions that are trying to support them too.
It's challenging for traditional institutions with their more structured curriculums, their emphasis on the teacher being in charge, to really adapt to the needs of a true self-directed learner.
Self-directed learning, its implementation, and challenges. A review dives into that.
It really seems like it's about finding a balance between providing structure and guidance while still allowing for the learner to have that autonomy and flexibility,
It's a tough challenge, but I think it's definitely one worth tackling.
especially considering all the potential benefits we talked about. But how do we actually do that? How do we deal with those challenges? What are some concrete strategies we can use to make self-directed learning work for us?
And luckily, we have a lot of resources that offer some really practical guidance.
Perfect. Well, we'll have to dig into those right after this. We'll be back in just a bit to continue our deep dive into self-directed learning. All right, so we're back, and we've been laying out a lot of the benefits and challenges of self-directed learning.
A lot to think about.
But now we need to figure out how to make it work. How do we actually do it?
Luckily, our sources offer some really great strategies for dealing with those tricky parts and getting yourself on the path to success.
Let's hear them.
One of the most useful pieces of advice I found was in What is Self-Directed Learning, the Access Group.
What they have to say.
They really emphasize how important it is to set clear expectations and goals. It might seem obvious, but when you're in charge of your own learning path, it's surprisingly easy to get lost.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like if you set off on a trip without knowing where you're going.
Exactly. You might enjoy the ride, but are you really going to get anywhere? So before you even think about what resources you're going to use or what strategies you're going to try, you need to figure out what you actually want to get out of this.
Asking yourself, what do I want to achieve through self-directed learning?
Exactly. And that goal needs to be specific, something you can measure. Like just saying, I want to learn about history isn't enough. A better goal would be something like, I want to understand the causes of the American Civil War.
So being really clear about what you want to learn makes a huge difference.
For sure. It helps you narrow things down and choose resources that actually line up with what you want to learn. And speaking of resources, this YouTube video, Developing Self-Directed Learners, goes really in depth on how to find them and how to use them well.
Practical advice. Love it.
It's packed with useful tips. Everything from making a structured plan to breaking down your goals into smaller pieces, using technology the right way, finding a mentor, getting involved in communities of practice. It's all about being proactive.
You have to be proactive,
Yeah,
especially when you're not in a traditional classroom where everything's laid out for you.
absolutely. It's all about taking charge of your own learning and going out there and finding the tools and the connections that you need to succeed. And this is where the digital age is actually a huge help.
In some ways.
We've got this insane amount of information and learning resources just a click away, but it also means that you need to be really picky.
Filtering out all that noise to get to the good stuff.
Exactly.
It's almost like self-directed learning in the digital age demands this whole new set of skills. It's not just about reading and writing anymore. It's about knowing how to find information online, figuring out what sources you can actually trust, sorting the real stuff from the fake stuff.
You hit the nail on the head. And that's why you can't just rely on algorithms or those curated content feeds. You have to develop those critical thinking skills so you can actually engage with information in a meaningful way.
It's like the difference between blindly following a GPS and actually knowing how to read a map.
I like that. Both might get you to your destination, but one way gives you a much deeper understanding of the journey.
And that deeper understanding, that's at the heart of what makes self-directed learning so powerful.
It's not just about memorizing facts, it's about developing the skills and the mindset you need to keep learning and adapting your whole life.
Lifelong learning.
Mm.
Which brings us to a big question. What's next for self-directed learning? With technology moving so fast, the way we work changing all the time, I can only imagine that it's going to become even more important.
Oh, absolutely. And many of our sources, including 185890.pdf, back that up. The future of work is going to demand that people are adaptable, resourceful, and comfortable with the idea of always learning new things.
The days of learning one set of skills and calling it a day, those are gone. We have to be constantly learning, constantly expanding what we know.
And it's not just about what you know, it's about how well you can learn. It's about having that curiosity, that resilience, that willingness to embrace new challenges. But this whole shift towards self-directed learning, it's bigger than just individuals figuring it out on their own. It's about our institutions, our schools, our workplaces. They have to change too.
They have to keep up.
Self-directed learning, its implementation and challenges, a review talks about that. Our traditional ways of doing education with those set curriculums, the teacher leading everything, those are going to have to change to keep up with the learners of today.
It makes sense. If we want to prepare students for a future where self-directed learning is essential, we have to create learning environments that support that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We need to move away from rote memorization, from passively sitting in a classroom, and focus on more active, inquiry-based approaches.
So it's not just about giving students more choices. It's about really rethinking the role of the teacher, how we design learning spaces, how we measure learning. Big changes.
Big changes, but I think they're necessary changes. Like one example is the rise of project-based learning. This is where students really get to dig into real-world issues, they often work together, and they use all sorts of resources to learn.
That sounds like a really great way to help them develop those critical thinking skills we talked about earlier, and problem-solving skills too.
It's about moving away from just memorizing facts and getting them to actually engage with the learning process.
And then there's technology. It's being used more and more to create really personalized learning experiences.
Oh, absolutely. Things like adaptive learning platforms, they can actually tailor the content and the pace of learning to fit individual student needs. That way, learners can go at their own speed and really focus on the areas where they need extra help.
That's amazing. It's almost like having a personal tutor that adjusts to your learning style and how fast you learn.
Right. But we can't forget that technology is just a tool. It's not the solution by itself. We still need that human element, that connection with the teacher who can guide and mentor.
So finding the right balance. Using technology to make learning better while still keeping those important human connections. But what about the workplace? How's this whole self-directed learning thing playing out there?
Well, things are changing there too. The traditional way of doing things where the boss tells everyone what to do and knowledge just trickles down, that's becoming less common.
So instead of knowledge is power, it's more like shared knowledge is power.
That's a good way to put it. And it's all happening because technology is changing so fast and companies need to be able to adapt quickly.
So they need employees who can learn new things on the fly, who can solve problems on their own, and who can work well with others.
Exactly. And that means that having a specific skill set isn't enough anymore. It's more about having that ability to learn how to learn, which is really what self-directed learning is all about.
It's like self-directed learning is becoming the new essential skill.
You got it. Organizations are starting to see that they need to create a culture of learning, a place where employees feel empowered to take charge of their own professional growth.
So it's a shift in mindset, not just for the individual learner, but for the entire organization.
Exactly. It's about moving away from the idea that training is a one-time thing and embracing the idea that learning and development should be happening all the time. And that's why we're seeing more and more companies doing things like setting up learning communities, mentorship programs, even giving employees dedicated time to work on their own learning projects.
That's really encouraging to hear. So investing in employee development isn't just about making people work harder. It's about helping them grow and adapt, which makes them even more valuable in the long run.
That's the idea. So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive into self-directed learning, I think the big takeaway is that it's not just a skill you can learn, it's a way of thinking, a way of approaching the world.
With curiosity, a desire to learn new things, and a willingness to tackle challenges head on.
Exactly. And in our final part, we'll dive even deeper into how to cultivate that mindset and really make self-directed learning work for you.
So we've talked about a lot. from individual strategies for self-directed learning to how it's changing our schools and workplaces.
That's a pretty big topic.
But now, I want to bring it back to you, the listener. What does all this mean for you and your own learning journey?
That's the real question, isn't it? We've gone through all these sources, and they offer some really good insights.
Lots of good stuff to think about.
But at the end of the day, the path of self-directed learning, it's a personal one.
You have to make it your own.
Exactly. It's about taking what you've learned here, the things that really clicked for you, and figuring out how they fit into your own life.
Whether you're trying to learn something new for your career, or just for personal growth, or you just love learning new things.
It's about finding what works for you.
And that's where I think that advice from The Art of Self-Directed Learning is so helpful.
Oh, yeah, it's a good one.
It all starts with knowing yourself. Before you even try any specific strategies, think about how you learn best.
Right, like what kind of resources work best for you.
Exactly. What kind of learning environment helps you focus? Do you like having a strict schedule, or do you prefer things to be more flexible?
It's like taking a look in your own mental toolbox before you set off on your learning journey.
Once you know your strengths and weaknesses as a learner, you can tailor your approach. You can set yourself up for success.
And once you have a good understanding of your own learning style, that's when you can start setting those really clear, specific goals we talked about earlier.
Right, figuring out exactly what you want to learn.
Whether it's mastering some new skill or diving deep into a subject that fascinates you, or maybe you've got a problem you're trying to solve, something that's been bugging you.
It's all about tapping into that curiosity, that desire to learn and explore.
Absolutely. But even with a clear goal and a good understanding of how you learn best, it's still easy to feel overwhelmed, especially if you're used to a more traditional learning environment.
Where everything's laid out for you, step by step.
Right. And that's where the advice from developing self-directed learners comes in. Break those big, scary goals down into smaller, more manageable steps.
Small bites.
Exactly. Don't try to do it all at once. Focus on those smaller steps, and you'll be surprised how quickly they add up to real progress.
It's that feeling of progress that keeps you motivated.
And don't forget, you don't have to do this alone. Find a mentor, join a community online, connect with other people who are interested in the same things you are.
Learning is always more fun when you're doing it with other people, and they can offer a lot of support.
They can keep you accountable too, so you're less likely to give up when things get tough.
Which they will, at some point.
It's inevitable. And that's where having a growth mindset is so important. It's something that the art of self-directed learning really emphasizes. When you hit a roadblock, don't see it as a failure. See it as a chance to learn and adapt.
It's about changing that voice in your head from, I can't do this, to, I'm going to figure this out.
Exactly. And remember, self-directed learning, it's not about being perfect. It's about being persistent. It's about being willing to try to make mistakes and to learn from those mistakes.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into self-directed learning, I want to leave you with this. It's not just a skill set, it's a journey.
A journey of exploration, of growth, of adapting to new things.
A journey that can enrich your life in so many ways.
So go explore your interests. Ask questions. Find resources that work for you. Connect with other learners. And never stop learning.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring and keep on learning.